Bald eagle is an American symbol and a Canadian resident. America's national bird is having some troubles. David Hancock is a local eagle expert. He's a wildlife biologist and a webcam wizard. It is my pleasure to welcome David Hancock back to Studio 4 to tell us more. Well, I know you have a degree in biology and you know a lot about wildlife and certainly about birds of prey and raptors, but you too know a bit about webcams.
Our live cameras in eagles' nest certainly changed, I think, a lot of the world's perception about this incredibly great bird that I've always admired. But all of a sudden, there was a camera 16 inches from an eagle laying an egg. It went into labor, and it's going, It did this about 13 times, and then the eagle looked down and it laid an egg. Now, the world got to see an eagle in labor. I didn't even know they did that.
I didn't either.
That's my contribution to the feminist discussion.
I know, I was thinking, you know, feminists, we make policy, not coffee. You know how that is. But back to that eagle's nest, it was so intimate. And it's something you had never seen all these years. 50 years you've been a fan of the eagle.
Looking at them with binoculars, with telescopes, from the airplane, but that camera looking at those few inches away from it, and we have them now. I mean, this is the beginning of the nesting season. Today, tomorrow, and the next day are the first eagles in the Fraser Valley. They're going to lay their eggs. Now, whether we have cameras on 5 nests right now.
Right.
Whether one of them lays for another week, probably 4 or 5 days before one of ours, by the looks of it. It's just the beginning of the nesting season. So it's pretty exciting for those who want to watch HancockWildlife.org on the
No kidding. And how many webcams do you have?
Well, we have 5 different nests with cameras, usually 2 in a nest. A kind of intimate close-up, and then a pull back to let you show the nest and maybe one of the perches or 2 that they land on, and occasionally come and bring their food and pluck it and before they bring it to the nest. So it's both, the close-up and the...
So when the female is in labor, where's he? The dad.
Well, he's usually off hunting because dad becomes, in the courting season and right through the incubation period and the raising of young, he will sit the eggs. He does that.
He will sit the eggs?
Oh, he definitely does.
Oh, great.
And he brings in and will contribute the actual feed to the babies. But most of his effort is actually catching the food and bringing it to the nest for Ma to do the feeding to the babies.
Okay, so Ma feeds the babies. And how long does it take an eagle egg to hatch, incubation?
35 days plus a few hours. Or
really?
More or less, depending on other little weather and whether she was disturbed and let it get cool. It's really right on 35 days.
And they have to sit on the egg at all times, or can they fly away? Or
oh, boy.
Do you know?
Well, we used to think, sure, they change off and they do that. But when we've had these cameras on the nest, it's awesome. The male will come, Ma's sitting, the male will come in and he'll sit there and he'll wait and he's looking at her, but maybe he then pecks her a couple of times and he moves over and he starts to push her out of the way. And the egg, we get to glimpse it for a few seconds maybe, and then he sidles in as she steps out of the way and he rolls it. It's almost continual paternal or maternal protection. It works both ways when she comes to replace him. Last year, at the Sydney nest, the most famous, the one that had the 55 million people watching it a few years ago, she jumped off the nest while she was incubating her 2 eggs, and she jumped off from when she left to when she got back was 53 seconds. But in that time frame, a raven lands on the nest, grabs an egg, and is gone. No. And then Ma's right back there scowling and screaming. But 55 seconds of, well, it was only about 18 that she left it unexposed, and the raven was in there, grabbed that egg, and was gone.
So the raven was waiting.
It was waiting, yeah, absolutely.
What about when the eaglet is called an eaglet?
Yes,
a baby,
little one,
baby eaglet.
Eaglet.
When they're born, who threatens them? Mother's gone off to, or does she go off?
Well, she has to go off and feed, and Dad comes in and broods the baby. For the first 10 days of the life, when they're very small, just out of the egg, to 10 days, the birds have not yet developed what we call homeothermy, the ability, like us as warm-blooded creatures, to generate their own heat from within.
Right.
So the heat that they get to keep them has to come from the parent. So it's constantly incubated by somebody, except on a really hot, sunny day. Well, then they stand back and they let the air in and the sun in. But tall, cool. Back they sit to keep the chick warm.
Now, would a crow dare go to an eagle's nest?
They would, and they do constantly. They're badgering, but the crow is so small. He moves in and out. A crow could damage an egg. It could damage a chick, but it's not like a raven who's substantial.
The raven. So the threat is the raven.
The threat is the raven. The threat is also other eagles. And the threat, which we've learned from these cameras, can also be horned owls.
Well, that's not very nice.
Who knew that at the middle of the night, when we've taken our telescopes and gone home, another whole drama was about to unfold? And now we have infrared cameras. The eagles don't see it, but we see what they're doing during the night, which is still caring for eggs and young. But what has come out of some of these cameras is that in the middle of the night, they're just as liable to get slammed in the head by a horned owl. And some young have been taken by horned owls. So there is another whole side of the daily cycle that we really knew almost nothing about, and that's kind of being revealed by these cameras.
Now, when they fledge, when they leave the nest, how old are they?
Almost exactly 12 weeks, give or take 2 or 3 days. The town birds is like town kids. Sometimes they're a little slow at leaving. I don't know, there's something about the town atmosphere that does it. They will sometimes not only stay in the nest a little longer when they're in a town, and I think there's an obvious reason, we can discuss it, and they also stay around the home, the nest, even longer. Normally in the wild, wild eagles make their first flight, and within 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, the adults abandon them. They just leave them. They've not taught them how to hunt. They just abandon them. So then the young is screaming and hollering, and after another 3 or 4 days, he says, I guess there's nothing coming here. I'll go, and it's built into their genes, I'm going to fly north to where the earliest of the salmon runs are, which is Alaska, northern BC.
This little eagle figures that out.
Well, he's not little. When he,
guess.
Well, this is the interesting thing. People tell me, I saw the small eagle flying around. The day the eagle leaves the nest at 12 weeks, that bird is bigger than it's ever going to be again in its life. It has longer feathers. They're going to be probably about a 6-inch longer wingspan than when he's mature. Each feather on the wing, the secondary, are a little bit longer. So the wing is broader and it's longer. And this is all about the fact that these young eaglets never learn to hunt, or they're not taught anything about hunting from the parent, and they have to, over the next year or 2 years, learn to hunt. So they got to get to where there is free, easy food. And where is that? That's on the northern Alaska, northern BC coast, where the first of the late summer salmon runs are already delivering up dead carcasses.
So somehow they know that, or to snap a herring along the way, or something like that.
Well, they might get a herring, but that doesn't take much skill.
No, doesn't fill you up that much either, I suspect. So tell me what's going on with the chum run and these eagles who are suffering and falling out of trees and going to the dumps. What's up?
It's us.
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah, well, it is. It's us. Well, and here's an interesting fact. When you and I first met, way back in the 60s, I think it was, I was doing Pat Burns shows in the early 60s. And I was doing all the surveys for my thesis then. And I had an airplane, and I covered not only the Gulf Islands and the west side with the airplane, but I covered the entire valley because I was at grad school here in UBC. At that time, I had 3 pairs of bald eagles nesting in the greater Vancouver area in the Fraser Valley. 3 pairs. I now have 360 pairs. And there's probably another 100 that I haven't found. What an incredible story of success on behalf of the eagles. Now, they had done well everywhere else. They didn't do well right here for one simple reason, and the reason is the us part. On the American side of the border, the Alaskans on the other side of the border, but most of the Alaska fishermen lived in Blaine, Washington, and the other nearby little ports. They, in Alaska, offered a bounty on eagles. You got paid to kill eagles. It was the attitude of the day. If an animal was a competitor, it was a vermin, and you shot it. And it didn't matter whether it was the cougar, the wolf, the eagle, the orca. And so what happened, all our eagles, which for breakfast they might be in the Boundary Bay or somewhere up the valley, for lunch they might cross the border a mile and they're sitting in Semiahmoo Bay, American side, and they get shot. It completely eliminated nesting eagles from most of the valley, eliminated them totally from Washington State.
Well, my people are kind of crazy. Here's to the American eagle, the great noble bird who's on our national emblem and on the dollars
and they're
and they're killing them. Perfect. But that changed.
And that's part of what we're talking about now. It's partially changed. Our respect for wildlife. That's really what it was. It's a change of attitude. Now, there's been 55 years since I've been following these, 60 years since I've been following these birds. There's a different downside happening. It's the long-term effect. We, again, us, the human being, has learned how to not just harvest something effectively. We learned how to harvest the oolakan, how to harvest the herring, how to harvest, but we over-harvest. Once we learn how to make a buck from something, we learn how to make big bucks from it until it's all gone. But the interdependence of life, how all these, it's the oolakan, the herring that feed the salmon.
Right.
It's the salmon that feeds the eagles, the bears, and the wolves. And this year, the big catastrophe that you referred to has resulted from the fact of the chum salmon. Not for people the biggest, most valuable salmon, but for the ecology of Alaska, British Columbia, the most important salmon because it's in the biggest numbers. And it's what feeds so many things. It returns the nutrients to the river. But the chum never returned.
And
they never came back.
We're not sure why, or are we blaming it on us, or just
it's hard not to assume that we are the culprit because we have taken out the lower levels of the food chain, whether we're harvesting the shrimps or the herring or the salmon, or whatever it is. We have greatly affected it. We've over harvested the different trophic levels of the ecosystem.
So take me to the Chehalis. Is that where it is, up by Harrison?
50 miles east of Vancouver, had the greatest concentration of eagles ever known anywhere. I counted just over 7,200 eagles in an area about 2 square kilometers. I mean, it's the size of this bay here.
7,200?
7,000. Nobody had ever seen this number of eagles in a small area before. Well, that was glorious from the point of view of seeing this many wonders. But the downside is, why the hell is this many birds here? Well, they were here because normally, as I mentioned earlier, when they leave the nest here in July and early August, they fly north to find the earliest salmon runs. They eat them. As the north gets colder in October, November, and the rivers freeze up, they come south. Fortunately, in the biological cycle, the salmon are also spawning later, farther south. So it's a perfect timing. They get forced out of the north along the coast by the freezing weather, but our salmon are more readily available. But all the way coming down the coast, this late summer, fall, there were almost no chum salmon. So the eagles were coming down early. We have our big Fraser Valley Bald Eagle Festival in the middle of November every year. We had over 1,000 eagles this year, to 1,500 eagles at the beginning of November. And it built up because the eagles, instead of staying up north, feeding on chum, there was no chum.
So they
came south
They're
looking.
going to the dumps, they're eating poisoned rats, they're doing things to try to survive, and it's making them sick, and they're falling out of trees and dying. Who's helping them?
Well, there's a couple of funny ironies here. Because they didn't have the salmon, they have spread out across the coast and probably into the intermountain regions looking for anything. I mean, they are scavengers. Well, they naturally came to big productive areas like Boundary Bay. But right next to Boundary Bay is the Vancouver landfill. And up and down the area and the region are many other landfills. And so a lot of them, they see the gulls at the landfill. That attracts the eagles. And I have to say, I think it was a saving grace for many eagles. I mean, I was never one personally for eating putrid, rotten salmon on the sandbar.
No.
Eagles love it.
Yes, true. They like dead cows.
They like dead cows, which they're eating a lot of right now because there weren't the salmon. But going to a dump is not biologically a lot different. Now, I don't think I want to eat out of the dump either, but it was all human food. It doesn't mean that some of it hasn't been contaminated, but when we humans have screwed up the environment with such a total disregard for the different food levels, taken away the eagles' food, I'm at least somewhat happy that we've given them back something at a landfill. So I'm not actually all that against it, because what's the alternative? The alternative is even more of them would have starved, and
Yes.
that doesn't sound like a good
Exactly.
idea to me
well,
either.
we will follow it. Thank you for your passion. Always nice to see you. Thank you,
Thank you.
David Hancock.